your applause for that. We are going to, I know we have a couple people jumping in a couple minutes, so send all these documents out to you all via email, but really wanted to spend quite a bit of time today looking at the overlay. In our last strategic planning session, we decided that three main things were going to happen. One, we are going to see our entire strategic planning into the system performance measures. Two, we were going to overlay the system performance measures with the regional action plans and determine what steps impact the system performance measures. And three, develop out a communication plan and talk about next steps around that communication plan and how that fits into the strategic plan. So today, really my goal is to review how staff overlaid the system performance measures and the regional action plan to see if you all have any changes. The second thing is really looking at the ideas that you all have created that I've just deemed putting in the parking lot of things that you all want to work on that apply to either the system performance measures or regional action plan steps that you want to actually call out and work on in your strategic plan. Or if there are other ideas that weren't captured yet in your parking lot or on your system performance measures overlay that say, like, this is something we really want to look at and measure, or potentially add another measure. For example, last time you talked about like measuring diversion more effectively, for example. And then lastly, I want to review the communications. There was a very small but mighty communications group that came together and said, let's review communications. And they kind of, in some ways, want to throw it back to you in a little bit of ways to say that we should have a work group specifically on communications and talk about kind of like, what does that look like? And then also potentially have a work group with both board members, committee members, and other subcommittee members who are interested, and then define, does that work group become actually a subcommittee, or does that stay as a work group, or what does that like structure look like? Danielle, I think that was a raised hand, but I'm not sure. If you want to pull yourself up, yeah.
No, sorry, it wasn't. I don't know.
I was like, I've never seen this icon before, so I don't know. So I'm hoping you all can see my screen. Oh, no, I stopped sharing my screen. So I'm going to share my screen specifically of this overlay. So we'll start there and then kind of go on from that. How does that sound? Awesome. I see heads nodding, so we're just going to go with that. In reviewing this, are there things that either A, you think should be moved, or B, like moved to a different section, removed, or look different? Let's start with that. Hey,
Katie.
Yes.
Just because this is my first meeting, would you mind just like doing a quick overview of this? And like, thank you. That would be really helpful.
Yeah. So, thanks, Rachel. The board decided that they wanted to place everything in the system performance measures. So the pink or like reddish boxes would be those 6 system performance measures that the system is tracking. I would say 7 that we've condensed down to 6 for jobs, both earned income and non-earned income. The blue boxes are steps within the regional action plan, and those have essentially been like added into the system performance measures where they make sense. So for example, if we add temporary housing, that will theoretically reduce our length of time homeless because we would have more places to put folks. And then the green is another, ideally the, hold on. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but these 7 across the top would be like the things that you all are measuring or like tracking, and all of your actions have to fall into one of those 7 steps that you're tracking. Similar to the regional action plan, like everything within the action plan has to fall into one of those 14 steps. I will also say like this yellow add-in box is how like the COC is theoretically measured, but if there is measuring of the system as a whole that we want to like impart. I don't know if we necessarily have like the jurisdiction over it, but we have more influence than anything else to say, like, as a monitoring, we want to like extend monitoring beyond just COC funded agencies, and say like we could be like looking at these as a whole, starting to like pencil down specifically like across the system. Are we looking at reduced length of time? Do we have one organization that's a complete outlier, and how do we help that one organization? For that could be a parking lot idea that you place into that. Does that help at all? Okay, awesome.
My Teams is like glitchy today, so hopefully you all hear me well, but this is so good. So definitely like the happy song at first. Katie, I came in late, but awesome job. So the only thing I'm thinking is for system performance measures, I think we really need a place where we're understanding like where that data comes from. And then that way we can make sure that like our plan, you know, is addressing like that particular issue, right? So I don't know if we can have like a little field where it shows like, okay, you know, this is like length of time in shelter or whatever Solari is using to determine that criteria.
Liz, thanks for bringing that up. And I think that would be something we could add. Ideally, this, depending on what you all decide to move forward, we're currently making like a progress snapshot on our website for the regional action plan. And my thought would be we would do a similar thing for the COC of like looking at progress over time. And it would have like kind of those descriptions. On Monday, during your board meeting, you will actually have a review of the 2021 system performance measures, and Solari is going to be giving that presentation and a breakdown of everything that's included. What is our trend from 2017 to now in each of these? And then what could we do to potentially increase those, or like decrease or increase depending on what the ideal situation would be. But we can add that description in each of these also.
It's perfect. And then I think like through that, it's going to kind of tie into like the monitoring and assessment of COC funded agencies, because we'll see like, okay, well, these are the projects that are putting in that data. So it's going to kind of feed into that. And then the other thing I think is then we would have our own box for like board strategic plan. And we would have our own kind of next steps for ways that we want to address improvements in these areas. Does that make sense? As an example, it's reduce returns within 1 year. So the regional action plan we say right now is increase access to and maintain existing rental units. There's a report right now that's being used. It's a returns to homelessness report. So I think that like one of our strategies could be assigning to our committee a standard process for how providers are utilizing the returns to homelessness report and implementing, you know, get funding gaps or whatever we're going to do to help them, you know, decrease returns to homelessness. Does that make sense?
Liz, is your thought that like under these blue boxes, there would be like, I don't know, orange boxes that are COC boxes? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying like an 8 over to the side.
No.
That's helpful. So yeah, we would add kind of all of those in here. And we have kind of a parking lot of ideas that we sent out, but there's probably more specifically like that returns to homelessness. And that is also, I think, Liz, what you just said is completely applicable, is like, this isn't all on the board to do. Like you can assign this to a subcommittee or to the committee or whoever you want it assigned to. Remember, you have 6 lateral but equivalent committees underneath you, lived experience, rank and review, ESG, committee, data, and coordinated entry. So any of those folks are looking for a direction from you all and can also have, like, you can task things down to them.
Excellent.
Does anybody else have thoughts on the way that we've assigned these, and if any of these regional action plan boxes should be moved or changed?
I just wondered too on regional action plan on the system performance measure, reduce length of time homeless. The very last box, increase access to local services such as medical, behavioral health. It 100% applies to the reducing length of time but also really in the last system performance measure, increase successful permanent housing exits. So it's like, are we concerned about kind of where they're at and like where it might apply most, or I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
I agree, Liz. I'm not sure that's the best placement.
Yeah, it's really like housing stabilization. I'm so sorry, Rachel.
Yeah. Maybe it's
So I guess
successful permanent housing exits.
Semi-misleading because in the action plan, this is specifically focused on outreach teams and getting outreach better connected. There's also things like, for example, that it could be under multiple. If you all are thinking about it differently and more thinking about like we need stabilization to keep them in housing, like these folks on the right are in multiple, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I think that's good to know, right? Like if that particular action plan is specific to outreach, you know, it would be good for us to also to be kind of aware of that on our strategic planning. Because I do think that applies also to connecting folks who are in housing to that. And if it's not an action plan that we're working on regionally, then how can we kind of come in and help support that conversation is I think what it is. But
Any other items? Is this also too small? Happy to adjust sizing if that's helpful.
I think this is good, Katie. I just like, so for the regional action plan, and just help me out here if I'm like out of sorts, but increase access to local services such as medical, behavioral health as it applies to outreach. Is there a place where like those action items are also determined? Like that's the goal, right? What are the actionable items that are being done there?
I would say yes, and they're part of the entire regional action plan, which is like I think 84 pages, including like implementation and all of that. This is part of it is to looking at metrics and what we're tracking to say this. So like it's really difficult to say like increase access to this would be like having people better connected to outreach and then having those outreach teams better connected to these other systems of care. And what does better connected mean? So I think that's kind of like something that the action plan is working through specifically, and how is that like better connection measured by local and tribal governments on that side. I think as far as like we've thought about measuring it from a standpoint of like increased access enrollments, but is that something we can like track on a measurable basis? It's more on a like one-on-one basis. That's not something we're currently tracking as a system. So I will say like big picture, I think, yes, it's across our entire system. We need to have it in outreach and also for folks in housing, but what is that like? That's going to look different for folks who are meeting with an outreach team versus folks who are already in housing. I hope that answered it.
Yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah, I really like how this is laid out. And I just want to make a comment and then I have a question. It will evolve because this is so new and, so much work and planning. So I think we talked about doing quarterly updates. I'm not sure. Are we, as things go along, some of these measurements or strategies, quarterly check-ins? Am I misremembering something like that? So
the regional action plan does have a quarterly update to management committee and regional council on that side of the house.
Okay.
As far as the board, you all have not decided, like you all have thrown out like a lot of ideas as how often you want to update the strategic plan, but that's part of this communication strategy is like, how often are you revisiting this? Is it on a quarterly basis, on a yearly basis? What you are not seeing is this is a PDF in front of you, and I, in the background, have publisher constantly updating. So everything is a moving piece. Nothing is like set in stone by any means. But do know that that's something for you all to decide.
I think it's really great, the work that you've done here. Under the first column, the regional action plan adds 770 units of temporary housing. Is that emergency shelter beds? Is that transitional? How is that being defined, the temporary housing?
Temporary housing is anything that is short-term. So emergency shelter, bridge housing, converting hotel rooms, transitional housing, safe haven, kind of any of those opportunities. I will say that where we got the 770 and the 1225 is based off of a reduction of 25%. That is a moving target because we're seeing an increase in homelessness and a increase obviously in funding also. So when the regional action plan numbers got determined, we said on a yearly basis we would update. It's based off of active numbers in HMIS plus a projection over the following year. And then the number that we currently have in our system is based off of the housing inventory count. So it's a lot of moving factors that all go into that 770 and 1225, and those numbers will change on a year-to-year basis also.
Well, it seems like quarterly we'd revisit that too. I mean, based on, so that's helpful. Thank you.
I will also say that one of the challenges with projecting a 25% reduction, but needing temporary and permanent housing, and I think cities have heard me say this kind of over and over, is we have added units and then we have committed units because they're not quite online yet. And so that is also something that we're taking into consideration, but they're not actively housing folks right now because they haven't been either online yet or built yet or whatever it may be. And so that is kind of something we're trying to track also, is just committed units. Sorry, Liz, I think I cut you off.
Oh, no, you're fine. Yeah, I think for me, and I might be too in the weeds on it, but it's our next steps would be okay, these are the actionable items that we want to determine as a board, we want to move forward on. And so I think we may need to know a little bit more detail about what the regional action plan is doing for their actionable items. And just as an example, assess and enhance the coordinated entry system. So the regional group may be doing certain things. We would need to know it so we're not working over each other, but ours would absolutely be assigned to our coordinated entry subcommittee. And these are the specific things we'd want to hear back from them.
Yes, exactly. And we want you also to know what is happening on the regional action plan. And this assessment is outsourced assessment. Home Base is the contractor on it. And will happen over the next year and a half essentially, and coordinated entry is taking the lead on that. So some of these things, and that may be kind of what maybe your boxes are green and the regional action plan is blue, and then we have a teal where there's a crossover, because there is some of the things in the regional action plan are things that the COC is taking an active role in.
I like that. I think that's really good.
Okay. Any other things that feel like we need to move or add them from regional action plan before we jump into your parking lot of ideas that you all have kind of brainstormed and talked about? Okay, I see head shaking no. Awesome. Okay. So then let's jump into your parking lot of ideas. Okay, I will make this bigger. These were all the things that came from your mural board that had like some guiding questions, but some of them just were like thoughts and ideas thrown out on how you want to tackle your strategic plan. And then we grouped them down to kind of what made the most sense. So we'll give you a second. I don't know if you want to start in a specific area or kind of jump around. Let me know your thoughts.
Can you scroll down a bit, Katie?
Also, if it's easier, this is in the email attachment. I know folks, some like it in front of them and some like it on my screen. So we'll say that too.
Katie, can you tell me what's already in place for monitoring?
Haley, Nikki, you want to jump in on that? I don't know.
Yeah, so we have reached out to all of the organizations and agencies that we currently have contracts with, and they are completing like a self-assessment tool. And then we're going to be reviewing that in the next few weeks to go over monitoring to see anybody who needs like some more one-on-one help versus just like basic oversight. So that is in progress. Those assessment tools are due at the beginning of next week, and then we'll move on to the next step.
So it's a self-assessment tool that's used, and based upon the responses from the organizations, you all decide whether or not there's a need for technical assistance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Tish, I will also add that folks that scored like significantly lower on NOFO last year will be automatically getting an in-person or like getting a like more in-depth monitoring. And so that like the self-assessment is like kind of across everybody, but then on top of it, we'll be doing that kind of like deeper hand-holding.
And is the monitoring based upon HUD's monitoring tool, or do you all use your own hybrid tool?
Haley, I can take that. It is a, or Nikki, feel free to jump in too. A couple of years ago, Focus Strategies helped us develop a monitoring tool. So it's a combination of that plus HUD's monitoring tools.
Thanks, Katie. I apologize. I'm bouncing from meeting to meeting. No, you answer. Thanks, Katie.
Katie, I'm going to jump in response to one of your first questions. Just more of a comment, I think, that I would see that this also is going to evolve as certain things are put into place, and then we can figure out if there are gaps that are still out there or something else that comes up. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I think we covered a lot of things, but I could see how this will continue to grow, especially after dashboards and reporting and potential site visits and or learnings that could be out there. So I didn't want us to think that this, like anything else, that it will just always evolve. Unless I'm incorrect, please let me know, but that's how I view this.
Yeah, that's 100% accurate. I think what Lisa brought up earlier of like either a quarterly review or like a more frequent review of this is going to be critical so that we're continuing to move in the right direction.
I would really like to drill down into the dashboard with measures of performance across the system. Like what would be in something like that if there is a quarterly dashboard that's different than what's being done Maybe it's not different, maybe it is. Part of this is me being, new to this level of work on the COC. So maybe there isn't anything else that needs to be in there, but maybe there does. So I don't know how to facilitate such a dialogue.
Yeah, I agree with that one as well. And like kind of going back to your layout where perhaps it's right under system performance measure. We've got some way of showing where that data is coming from that's being reported to HUD, who are the providers that put in that information, and then what are the results right now. And if we put that under every system performance measure, I think it's kind of a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that came up a couple of years ago when we did an entire engagement of our system is we had providers not really wanting to share that information. Is that a place where we have crossed over that bridge? Is that something that you as a board are concerned about? Is that kind of, how do you all want to handle that? So I think there's a couple ways that this can be done. Is either what data is incorporated in each system performance measure could be as like robust as like emergency shelter data, transitional housing data, rapid rehousing numbers, or it can be like every single agency that is doing this and what their length of times are. And so wanting direction from you all as to like what is being included or not included, and how do you all feel about that as a board?
I was thinking higher level, not at the level of detail of each agency, but more rolled up numbers. And I don't know if this makes any sense, but the document we were first looking at, the strategic planning framework, would we want to say quarterly, okay, 700 units are needed, where are we at in this first quarter? Okay, 200 were added, or is that reported elsewhere? Is that it? Those are the kind of things that would help in my thinking on a bigger picture. Permanent units, how many are, where are we at with that? So I'd like to hear from others if they think that makes any sense.
No, I agree. I think each measure should be on that dashboard. I'm not sure if we get that information from the system performance measures, but I would like to know what was the plan in evaluating? Is there a plan for evaluating?
So I want to break down the differences. The regional action plan has metrics attached and is being reported to management committee and regional council on a quarterly basis and has a progress snapshot attached to that. You all are the only ones that control, well, I shouldn't say the only ones. If you are basing your strategic plan in the system performance measures, these are things that are going to have an impact on your system performance measures, but the goal of the regional action plan wasn't to impact the system performance measures. That is for local and tribal governments, versus like there could be other activities that are going to impact system performance measures. And that is something we would kind of tag you all in creating those and determining how you want to track those. So that makes sense.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, how are we going to measure impact with the regional action plan? Where are those numbers going to come from?
So those are all numbers from local and tribal governments. There is an entire plan of how that is being implemented. They're meeting on a monthly basis. Those are quarterly coming back. And there's a progress snapshot for looking at that kind of implementation. That will, like, we are happy to provide updates to you all on how that implementation is going at the board level, or you all are welcome to like tune into those meetings too. We would kind of defer to you all on what what level of hearing do you want to hear about the regional action plan, and then, but I wouldn't say like those will be a kind of like I guess my thought, I will speak just for me, it's a both and of like, there are other things that the COC is doing that's going to be impacting these system performance measures.
So I think I want to go back to that conversation too around the provider level data. So in the system performance measures on that framework, I do think we need to have where the data is coming from and the results. Now, if that's just for us, it's like emergency shelter, transitional housing, right? Like what are the project types? I do think though that for the purposes of the monitoring, that we do want you all to have access to that data at the provider level. So that way, you're going beyond waiting for a poor score on NOFA, you're going beyond like a self-report, and you're looking at how those projects are impacting system performance measures. So that would be great. And then if we can also go back to the framework, and I think like highlight areas on the action plan where we are going to want to see on our strategic plan where we're at with achieving the goal. For instance, on that 770 temporary units, right? Is there a way that we have a place here where we're getting the update from the regional group on what that number is? And maybe not for all of them, right? But that would, when we look at this quarterly, it would help us see like, have we made any progress? Is there anything further that we need to do? Since like, in essence, we're saying that that will impact system performance measures when those actionable items are adhered to and, we have movement on it, it will impact system performance measures as well. So one of them, I think, is that the add 770 units of temporary housing. If we had that data that you all already have from the regional group on ours, then it would be helpful. And so I don't know if we want to like take a moment to kind of look through this and see if on this one, there's anything else we think we'll need updates on.
I think that's a good idea.
The other thing is like, we can give you an update of all the things going on with the regional action plan. Like it doesn't, like if you all want it to be just like certain items, we're happy to do that. But if you all want like every quarter an update of what is going on, like we can spend 15 to 20 minutes of your board meeting doing that.
Well, that whatever's most efficient, right? But maybe it's during the same quarterly board meeting when we're reviewing this, or however frequently we determine we're going to view this, is that we also have that overlay of information. Obviously want to not overload information so it's relevant, but I think that'd be fine. I don't know what everyone else has thought. Okay.
I would agree.
Yep.
Yeah.
So then it sounds like we're able to go back to your other form. Katie, sorry about that.
I changed my screen sharing so I can flip back and forth without stopping and restarting sharing. I also want to call Joan, thanks for calling that out in the chat. After this parking lot of ideas, we also have a parking lot of ideas for your entire communication plan. And communication is between in and out. And so we incorporated advocacy as an out in that parking lot.
So I guess if we just start to try to knock it out, like I feel like that first bullet, evaluate the performance of COC funded providers, is addressed in their current, monitoring of NOFA score, technical assistance, self-report, and adding project level detail to their level of information coming back from system performance measures. So it seems as if we can remove this and almost because it's already on there. Mm-hmm. Except for the site visits by board members. Is that something we all want to, yeah.
I would want to keep the site visits, which may also include interviews with staff and clients and participants.
Mm-hmm.
Is site visit something the board can commit to? and how often would you want to do them? And what does that look like for you all?
My thought, Katie, is that maybe we would determine a minimum number of board members that needed to be per site visit, because when board members say they're coming for a site visit, then agencies have to prepare for that. And we certainly don't want to be wasting their time or causing them undue burden. So I would say if we are going to commit to that, and I do think it's a wonderful idea, there's just nothing like seeing the service. There's just nothing that can take the place of that. So let's say we said, okay, a minimum of 2 or a minimum of 3 board members have to be at every site visit, then we would have to commit that would happen. But I don't think it's practical to say that, there'd be 5 board members at every site visit or something like that. But I'd say maybe minimum of 2 or something.
I think minimum of 2, and maybe, if more go, that then they can report back. I think quarterly or every other month, I'm not sure how to put a calendar together for this, but I think I would commit to doing maybe 2 site visits. I'm not sure how many were, like, what's the math? How many are we talking about?
Well, I think there's a number of ways to look at that as well. So you could do it based, like in coinciding with the monitoring process. Mm-hmm. So when someone's getting monitored, then a site visit goes along with that. And that's how it happens, because everyone's not getting monitored every year. Or you could put people on like a 3-year cycle so that programs get like visited every 3 years type of thing. So, you come up with some kind of schedule like that. I mean, I'm sure there's a million other ways to do it. Those are just 2 that came up off the top of my head.
Yeah, makes sense.
I would like to throw out and interject. I believe site visits are a great tool and opportunity to see things firsthand. The opportunity and risk that we have in that, if there is not a format that is followed, that it could then go into different directions based on who is on the site visit compared to who is on others. And I do not believe we would want to put any organization on the defensive, like not sure what we're there for. So I think as long as we would be able to, kind of put that out. I'm also very sensitive to making the requests and fulfilling the requests. So yeah, if it's within every 3-year cycle that they're visited, twice or something like that, we're not over committing, because the last we want to do is to cancel the day before. And if we're saying minimum of X, one drops out, then it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. So those are all the things. And I would like to have further conversation, and may not be today, about conversations with participants. I would want to understand a little bit more what that looks like, because I would not want to put the board, the organization, and the participant in a weird spot. So not disagreeing, but just would love to hear a little bit more how we would, manage that overall. So
I'm wondering, specifically in the communications small group, they talked a lot about having like open forums and also like sharing success stories of different like organizations. And so I'm wondering if maybe like that is a better location for like participant interaction, having like a more kind of like informal, like I think the goal, Tish, in sharing that is having like informal conversation between board members and participants. And so is there a way to do that in a not like through an agency and rather like through an open forum space?
And I'm drawing on my experience from Connecticut, going back to Connecticut again. People are going to get very tired of hearing about Connecticut, but I'll say it anyway. So when we went through our monitoring process, we did have site visits, not only from the COC board, but they also sent out peer support recovery specialists to speak specifically to our participants. And they used a fidelity model where everybody was asking the same questions in the same way to the to different groups. And there was a very light touch type of training that only took 45 minutes to an hour. So everyone knew what was expected of them. Everyone knew how to build rapport, and everyone knew how to use the tool.
I think that's important for consistency as well, to have a tool that we're using. So it doesn't matter who's going out on the site visit, it should be conducted the same way.
I think those are great ideas. And I just want to say it's great to hear ideas from other continuums, because, you know, we're only in ourselves. So don't be afraid to say, from my experience in Connecticut, I think it's really cool to hear other ideas.
I only said 5 times today.
That's okay. That's all right. I love it. One of the things I was going to say is we do a very similar process here at Chandler for a different fund source. And it's a much less formal type of monitoring. We call them agency tours, but it's really to give our commissioners, who are ultimately the evaluators of our general fund awards, the opportunity to feel and touch and understand the programs. And they don't have a background like we have in a specific topic, right? They're community members. So it's really important for them. But one of the things we do then to avoid this gigantic discrepancy and having like whatever comes out of people's mouths when they get to an agency. So we send like the agency a letter, like, this is what we're doing. Here's who will be there. Here's our expectations. Here's a sample agenda. Here are some of the types of things you might want to consider. And, you know, we invite you to invite a program participant. This is how long they would have to speak. You know, like, so we just give them like a real framework so that we create like consistency among the agencies and understanding of both the participants' roles when they get there, right? And give the agency, you know, this is an idea of what we expect. Otherwise, it can be really all over the board. So we just have like some infrastructure around it.
I will also add on the layer of like staff is at everyone in Chandler. And so MAG staff will be at every one of these site visits also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was kind of my question, Katie. So like the board member monitoring of COC funded providers is more like Ryan was saying, sort of like an opportunity to go out, see, hear, touch, feel. But MAG staff is going to do the like monitoring. Okay.
Yeah, this was this kind of came out of less of like it came out of the conversation around monitoring, but it came out of like board felt like they were pretty far removed from programs. And so feeling like we needed to have like a softer touch that was trying to figure out a softer touch that was less formalized. So other ideas that were kind of sparked around this too were like holding office hours or having a space for committees and subcommittees to give voice to what is happening, having specifically COC funded programs, having like a listening session for COC funded providers to give feedback. There's been kind of like a whole list of things. A lot of those have like kind of now shifted into the communication plan. But this one is like less communication and more like action, I guess. So I've left it here.
You know what, though? I think that's a really important question from Rachel that came up, is maybe this really is more experiential and meant to give people a sense of things. Maybe we really very intentionally need to move this out of monitoring and into communication, because this is not meant to be punitive. This is honestly meant for everything I said, but also to give the board or the agency an opportunity to show off, if you will. I mean, in a positive way, to say, hey, this is what we do. It's really important. Look what we're achieving. And look what can be done in our community. You know, it's more like that in my mind.
I like that idea, Ryan, a lot, just because when I think of monitoring, I think of a very formal process, like in a formal checklist, and like sometimes there can be some like corrective actions that come out of that, but that's not necessarily what we're getting at. We want some dialogue and understanding and FaceTime and stuff.
Yes.
I would agree. And from my time in Ohio, when I would do site visits, I would want to make sure, because I wanted to calm down the expectations because of the unknown and to make it more conversational. And so I think that, you know, anytime you hear board, it's like, what is that going to mean? And then I agree, having MAG staff in attendance, of course, and the org, especially if there's going to be conversations with participants, because questions could be asked that we don't know the answer to. So we would want to be able to defer anything specific that, as opposed to misspeak in that setting. So.
This is just a weird brainstorm that's coming out of this conversation, but wouldn't it be cool to, each time we did that, so let's say it's once every 3 years someone comes to your agency, that whoever the board members who are there that time bring that agency some kind of recognition gift, not like a gift, but like a thank you plaque from the board for, you know, being such an important part of our continuum of care or something. So we always came with that, and, you know, it was almost like a thank you visit.
I love that idea. I think that's really good, Ryan.
It is great.
I'm thinking, based off of this like whole conversation round robin, it may be better to not overlay with monitoring and having it just being on a rotating calendar, because then there is that added pressure, and it really does separate monitoring and assessment from touch, feel, understand programs.
I would agree.
Okay, I want to be mindful of time. Are there other things in this parking lot of ideas that you all can see right now that are like, absolutely, we don't want this to be one of our focuses and we don't want it added? Or we don't want somebody in the COC to focus on it, because some of these things are already in progress in some ways.
I'm a tiny bit confused about a lot of places I see like have a dashboard or have a report or whatever, and I just want to be cognizant of, we're really working to make this quarterly report that we're getting of the analysis of our inflow and outflow and all of that stuff really useful. So where might these things overlap? I don't want there to have to be a million reports that staff has to get together all the time. So like, are there things we can find out that are in there? Or is it truly different? So I just want to be like conscious of that as we move forward.
I guess I asked that question of, I was hoping there'd be like, yeah, these are the things we want to cross off, and it would be really easy to cross off. Are there any things on this list that you're like, okay, that's great, but we aren't wanting to take that on right now?
Yeah, I see coordinated entry down here, the assessment tool, transparency. I'm just wondering if the consultant that they're hiring, that you all are hiring, is going to take care of all these areas. Do we really need to be concerned about that? The consultant's going to give us a report. Is this something that we need to do?
I agree. Let's CCI that you found one that we can remove. Yeah, sounds like it's done.
I disagree.
Well, I disagree too.
Not the last point, keep the last bullet, but go ahead, of course.
I disagree because I think there's a lot of momentum in this arena, and just maybe like the quarterly report on the MAG plan, there's a quarterly discussion. So maybe we're not taking it on so much, but we're paying more attention to it. There's work being done on race equity and coordinated entry and different things in that arena that I just think are very timely and we should stay on top of.
So could we name that specifically? Because I know that the assessment tool is going to be driven by the consultant, because I saw that in the MOU or the RFP, RFQ, whatever went out. But we will participate in that discussion, I'm sure.
I think the consultant's going to bring us information about what they find and potentially some recommendations, but I think it's very much up to this board to approve.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I will pause. The evaluation of coordinated entry is both an evaluation and implementation. You all will be very involved in part of that along with the coordinated entry subcommittee. So I think the question for you all is this something that is kind of already in progress and coordinated entry is taking on? We can add it, and this is something that you all want to keep tabs on, but this isn't something you are actively wanting to work on.
Going to accomplish. So
Well, I
that's,
feel like we're accomplishing it through the consultant, right? That's our mechanism, but it's very much on our agenda. I would hate to see that taken off our agenda, on the forefront of our agenda.
Well, and then the last bullet, determine what level of direction and guidance will be given to the coordinated entry subcommittee. I'm also on the coordinated entry subcommittee as the board member representative, and they're just doing such a fantastic job. So I do think that if we keep that bullet and remove the rest, then we can line out, exactly what updates do we want to hear of. Or if they're, but that they'll do the work and they'll bring it back.
I think that was actually there because they were asking for direction, correct?
I think we should leave that last bullet. That's our responsibility.
well, it sounds like we're leaving them all because the consultant is working for us to do these activities.
Yeah, I think our high interest in this led to the consultant team. So with these goals in mind. That's my take on it.
Okay. So I've heard leave coordinated entry. I've heard some all sorts of opinions on that. How about data? Are there things within this data section that you all do not want to go down, start doing? I will say this is in progress. This is in progress.
Yeah, that's very important.
Wow. I think that I feel strongly we need to review and evaluate the uniform data elements on a yearly basis. I feel like that should just be not a wish list, but that should be part of what we look at. And I understand that it generated a lot of controversy and all that in the past. So that's how I feel about that one. And then the one below it, data elements, the insurance information thing is a big one in my view as a service provider. We added that into our programming during the pandemic. We got permission to do that. The difference that makes in knowing which health plans people are on is huge. And now that we're an access provider, although we're not billing yet, that really matters. And you have to put things in place. So, but does the work need to take place? I don't know. Maybe it's more of a reporting thing. The work that I think needs to take place is the third bullet.
Now, I would think both of the third and fourth bullets, we could rely on the data entry subcommittee to bring us recommendations on that each year. It just would need to be part of their yearly tasks.
That makes sense.
And certainly if we had ideas, we could send them down to the data committee for consideration as well.
Yep.
And then develop a list of data to be presented to the board. So I feel like I feel like that's in progress in terms of us getting the quarterly analysis the way we want it. I don't see that as separate. So I feel like that's an in progress piece. And then that developing monthly dashboard of work being done. Again, to me, the dashboard would be the outcomes. I mean, between the newsletter of you guys telling us everything that's happening, the system performance measures, that would be extra. What am I looking for? Duplication of effort. I think we're building in everything we do a feedback loop. So I'm not sure we need like these extra pieces personally.
Other people's thoughts? Do people feel okay with these track changes that you're seeing? Oh, you're not even,
Yes,
now you're seeing.
I do.
Okay. How about monitoring and assessment? I think we got all the way through this is the last one that we didn't address. We've kind of skipped around. How do you all feel about a gaps analysis? Do you feel like we're already doing it? Do you feel like you need it done?
When was the last one done?
The last one was done by an external consultant in 2018, and it had very mixed feelings in our community once the gaps assessment was done, and it was not widely accepted in our community.
I remember that. Yes, because people, as a provider, were like, wait, they didn't even capture this and they didn't say that. Is ASU, is the nexus or the county or other places doing any kind of gaps analysis? Maybe it doesn't need to be here. Or what about the Department of Housing and the state plan? Maybe this isn't one.
I mean, there's so many community assessments that we do.
I will also say, like, so there was a gaps analysis done on the COC system. The regional strategies was 37 strategies that were like a further gaps analysis. So like it's being done, and there are a lot of things. There's a lot of data and research that shows what is happening and not happening in Maricopa County. And we can't, like, that is all that was done just this past year in May.
And that's what we use for the NOFO?
The NOFO is based off of all of the data in HMIS and then what housing is available. So NOFO does not actually ask for a gaps analysis from that level. Like, I will say every gaps analysis we've done is like on whole system and even parallel systems to a degree from the standpoint of like employment and kind of all these other things that aren't necessarily homelessness, versus NOFO is like more narrative around what we're doing.
Okay.
Although like always could be doing more, I'm sure. Like we can better integrate with schools and employment and all of those systems.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm hearing scratch, but I also didn't hear like a definitive Katie cross it off.
I don't think it's necessary. I think we're building such a robust system now of we've got strategies, we've got systems performance measures, we've got, I mean, I think the data will tell us our gaps. I don't think we need a separate thing, personally.
I agree.
Yes, let's not waste money on a consultant that we might be unhappy with what we hear.
Yes, and then we'll just ignore it because we don't like it. I mean.
Exactly, yeah.
It always feels weird when you have an outside agency come to your community and say, you know, I see these gaps. Then again, maybe we don't see them because we're here. I don't know.
I was going to say in Connecticut.
Please tell us what you did in Connecticut.
Okay, what about access to local services and permanent housing?
Yeah, for me, the LIHTC thing is huge. It's a big opportunity in our community right now. And I think it really falls under, obviously, like increasing permanent supportive housing units.
That is huge.
And then even like the discuss with coordinate entry, the ability to connect referrals with LIHTC to the 30% units. Yeah, so it's like a potential for building out additional housing resources for our coordinated entry system if we can get the LIHTCs to commit to that if we subsidize their 30% units. So,
and it's very complicated to do that. I mean, we have the seven LIHTC properties, and part of one, Parsons Village, is supportive housing. So it is a very difficult venture to do all that matching of units and incomes. It's hugely important.
And do you have any Yeah, you mom, yeah. Do you have any like project-based vouchers going into any of those units?
Yeah, we just applied for vouchers and we got 10 for Parsons Village. But again, we have a separate arm for that and separate consultants that write those applications.
Oh yeah, that's great. It's good to hear.
So I had two thoughts on this. Maybe this is a place where, you know how there's mission moments shared at the board? Maybe there's a focus in this area because there's such a lack of housing, whether it's tiny homes or light tech or whatever it might be. My second thought is this is an area where we need advocacy to support the housing coalition and to demand more from communities. So I don't know what that looks like exactly, but I think it ties into that advocacy role.
Noted, and we will get to that in just a second, unless there's other thoughts on these last other bullets. How about these last three? Do we need to keep them? Is that something you all want to work on? Is this a hot topic for you?
How long do these work? Are these anticipated for? These goals that we're discussing?
1 year.
Okay.
Or longer. Like they could be longer, but like theoretically, this is your like strategic planning for
a year. Okay.
But then you all could say like, we want these things to apply for 5 years.
Well, if it was gonna be longer, I would say maybe you wanted to broaden it to not, maybe it's not just light tech, but it's, other things. But I think to focus on light tech for a year would be very helpful. 5 years later, we might have figured that out and need to broaden this a little bit. So that's why I was asking.
I would say focus on 1 year, but you are quarterly changing it and can always add or adapt, or like ideally next year when you all strategic plan, you would be taking this strategic plan and making it better, adding things, changing things.
Okay.
All right, feelings about these, keep them. I'm hearing nothing, so that I don't know if that means completely scratch them off or keep them because they're very important.
I don't know that I would say they're not important, but I also think it's part of the continuous evaluation and just the conversation instead of just today going through that. I do really well when seeing things and then digest it and then coming back to it. That's how I did it when I was in Ohio.
So maybe an on pause, how does that feel for people? Like we can return to this later? I see head shaking yes. Okay, we're gonna go with that because we have 50 minutes left in today's session and we have a lot to still get to. All right, y'all need like some happy dance or something because you all are feeling flat. It's 4 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. It's not even Friday yet. Come on, people. Okay, we're gonna jump into communication strategy. So I will say our small but mighty communication plan group met and had like quite a bit of thoughts kind of in a lot of different directions. We've broken it down into between the COC, in and out, and set it in the framework of this should start as an ad hoc work group, including board members, committee members, and other subcommittee members, and then have like potentially move to a committee. What are thoughts on that first? I will say that the reason we said ad hoc work group is the thought was that we want it to be like quick and responsive versus like having a committee and having like a really set structure to it would slow down the work. But eventually getting there where there would be a set number of seats for each different group would be helpful so that we're hearing voices from all different folks. All right, heads nodding yes. I'm going to just keep going. So between, there was a lot of ideas and thoughts, kind of broken down into some separate bullets. There was thoughts that you all should be the centralized hub for all activity going on in the community regarding homelessness. That led to a lot of questions of like, what does centralized hub mean? What all are we including? Is this COC? Is this everyone? Would love for you all to answer that or throw it to this committee to answer. Up to you. The next one being create a framework for sharing success stories. This was thrown out. Could we do this at the board meetings? Should this be in the newsletter? What do y'all think? Create a process for an inclusive feedback loop. So this was, we need space for COC funded agencies and participants to be able to give feedback to the board on any policy decisions you make. The initial thought was a quarterly listening session. Downside of that, need board members to attend and also participants to attend. So you got to be able to commit the time. And then I just moved over our site visits by board members on a calendar basis with a minimum of 2 board members, format to follow. We're going to spend 15 minutes on this section. So if you all like, I'm cool with silence too.
I personally love to read success stories.
Yes.
The presentation of them is always a little bit awkward, I feel like. I don't know why that is, but.
So in the newsletter?
Reading them with a picture. Doesn't have to, you know, if that's available, I think is awesome.
Yeah, I like the idea of it being in the newsletter.
Are you all receiving the newsletter, aka the one newsletter that's gone out in March? And how did, in March,
yes.
For March. And how did you all feel about it? Did you have things that you wanted changed about it? Was it helpful?
It was helpful, especially for ACES-DV is being domestic and sexual violence and not really doing a lot in the housing area. The whole organization was interested in what was in the newsletter. So it was very helpful. And to also share, like, what are you doing in there? What is the COC about? So it was really helpful.
Awesome. Jonah, I want to go to you. If you have other people who are interested in subscribing to the newsletter, let me know and I will get them added. Just a short plug. Joan, you're up.
Okay, so you guys are going to kill me, but I'm just thinking out loud, so you can poo-poo my comments. But you know, because we're trying to change some narratives with the work that we're doing, I almost feel like a newsletter. I love you guys, but a newsletter, just like our newsletters, fall on deaf ears. I get it, like everyone's inbox is, but where we'd still do a really good job, because it's sometimes our generation's solitaire is Facebook and social media. And so if we could do some success stories on does MAG, forgive my ignorance, does MAG have a Facebook feed? And can we do some TikToks? You know me, I'm all about the TikToks, even though I don't understand them. Can we do something on social media to highlight success so that people, including policymakers, no longer say, well, are you even doing anything? Nothing's like, we just need to grab the stories and push it out. Okay, I'm shutting up.
Joan, I think that's really good. I do think that's more out than between. So the newsletter really is for between COC. So you all know what subcommittees are doing and subcommittees know what you all are doing, but I think that definitely applies to like this out piece of it.
I do like, for efficiency though, Joan's idea, right? Because oftentimes with success stories, we're like, give a success story and it's more of like a task that they're trying to check the box. But if the in-between is also in preparation for the outside marketing, then we're like encompassing it all and we're getting feedback and it makes it a little bit more relevant. So
You know,
it starts there, but then it actually gets pushed out.
Going back to, I think it's a waste of time to ask people to share success stories at the board. So I'm glad that I think Ryan spoke about that. But for me, it would be beneficial to maybe hear about a new innovative program or expansion. So for example, today I heard on the radio, Phoenix Rescue Mission is expanding its works program into Phoenix. That's great. You know, they may not be COC funded, but are there things that we would want to hear that would move forward what we say we want to do in the plan? You know, so thinking differently about those mission moments, definitely not just with the personal success story, because it's not enough, in my view. But I like the social media ideas too. I will tell you, we do post a lot of stuff at CAS. They don't necessarily get a lot of reads, and so I guess we'd want to assess that. How much work on staff does that require, and does it really end up people reading them?
We can also jump down to out and in, and then that will give you kind of more thoughts. Is that helpful? That's nodded. Okay, sweet. So out is really creating an advocacy process and strategy. We have some thoughts on that. So I'm gonna just like put a pin on that and come back. Creating a process for reporting out to MAG Management Committee and Regional Council. So not only do you all want to know what's happening in the regional action plan, but they want to know kind of what's happening with you all and if you have recommendations for them as to how they are working. We just added this social media for increased outputs to greater audience, both success stories of people and programs, and then any new programming that is launching or expanding. Into the COC, we have talked about creating a process for an inclusive feedback loop. So in our smaller group communications, we did talk about potentially having a like quarterly listening session and breaking that listening session. Maybe it's like an hour and a half listening session. The first 45 minutes is really for COC programs to give you feedback. And then the second half is really for like anybody, like general public, businesses, anything around homelessness in general, so that you all like don't have to necessarily have two separate sessions that you all have to come to, but are able to hear that feedback both from people inside the COC and outside the COC who are concerned about homelessness. How does that feel to folks?
I think that's super interesting. I don't know if it's good, bad, or will work, but I think it's super interesting. I think we could pilot something and maybe not totally commit until we figure out if this like works or something.
100%. Let's not
lock
ourselves into it, because I could see it being really beneficial or a poop show. And we don't want this written in stone.
It depends on what was written in the news the day before. Like, you know, it could be.
Also, the other conversation about this was to have it like in a little more informal of a space. So not in a like Robert's rules to know type situation.
For
where
sure.
Like, it's really like formalized, but really just more of like a dialogue conversation, kind of like sitting around your coffee table, not as formalized as much as you can in a MAG conference room. Or via Zoom.
Well, it doesn't even have to, I mean, could it be in a community space? So it's not intimidating, because I don't feel like we're really inviting the public when we're saying come to a MAG meeting room, right? I mean, you have to get used to being comfortable there. I think it's not like Joe Random is, you know.
The other option is we could have it in like a community space that like, is inviting. Like we could put it in a coffee shop, right? Like
exactly.
We could have it
I feel like that would be more real.
In the Arizona Housing Coalition.
Or a library conference room or.
Okay. I'm gonna go back to advocacy process unless we have kind of a want to keep talking on this? Awesome. You suggest 3 times a year, not 4. Joan, tell me more.
Well, I mean, just every quarter, all of a sudden, it sneaks up upon you and you're like, oh my God, I just don't have the capacity.
I say we commit to 1 to pilot
Right.
only
Okay. So just ignore exactly what I said and listen to Ryan.
and reassess.
Yeah. That's really, can I have that printed on a t-shirt? Ignore what I say.
Yes,
Listen to Ryan.
I commit to 1.
And then my thought there is like, so we should probably have I don't know, we've done listening sessions for like by intervention, like rapid rehousing listening sessions, shelter listen. So maybe it's by intervention, maybe it's just a free for all. I don't know what it is, but what's like the feedback loop to the rest of the board? Like, these are the things we heard, like, are there any actionable things that we can do from there or whatever with these listening sessions? So it's, I don't know what that looks like.
Like, what are the goals of our listening session?
Yeah,
like, what are we going to do with that info?
Exactly. Like, are we just listening, or are we going to hopefully get some like great feedback that we want to do, have some action?
And people are going to want to know, like, what are you going to want to do with this information? Is it worth my coming? Yeah. I don't know the answer. I just think you're right.
Other thoughts, feedback on listening session or other things in this list?
Could we? I'm wondering if, because one of the things we're trying to do is give the providers an audience, right? Should we survey them and say, like, what would you want a listening session to be like? What outcomes would you want from a listening session? Like, do you even want a listening session? Let them sort of tell us how we should design it.
100% in agreement. That way, people may not feel that it's being done to them, but they can actually create what it would look like. And I would add to it, no is an okay answer.
And then after, for the participants who came, we could say, what did you like? What didn't you like? Did you feel heard? Would you want it structured differently? Should we do it again or just scrap it? I don't know.
A post survey.
Yeah.
So I think everything that you all just said was more for people within our system than necessarily outside. So how would you want this structured in tandem with like kind of anybody who wants to come talk to you about homelessness and give you feedback on what is happening and not happening? Do you want that to be a separate listening session? Do you want that listening session?
I feel like that's what we call a council meeting. I don't know though. It really is an interesting concept. Like, if you were to really invite, I also feel like maybe that's a better role for like an ASU or like, hey, we're holding a community listening session on blah versus a board. I think as a board, we have constituents, right? Like, we are here to serve the providers and ensure that everything in our system is coordinated, right? But in terms of a community listening session, if you advertised it right, we could get into spaces that we don't have control over. You know,
I hear what you're saying. I think that is like a really good feedback point, that your constituency is COC funded providers and COC participants. This came out of specifically you all voicing that maybe neighborhood leaders and businesses need an outlet. If you all feel like that you aren't the right outlet for that, that's like a totally fair thing to say. But I do think like that's a decision point you all need to make, like as a group.
I think you're exactly right. We're not the outlet, but I do think we should potentially participate or be willing to be on a panel or whatever when the right people conduct these kinds of things for the community. I think we should be a willing participant, but I think, yeah, we would be inviting stuff that we can't necessarily solve.
But also to that point, Ryan, like who do you anticipate being the right host? I mean,
You, ASU, if a city wanted to say, we want to know what you guys think, but the city would really, when cities do that, they have to be ready to act when they're asking for, a United Way could do something like that, but whatever body was going to do it, they'd have to be willing to use that information in a positive way. And
well, the reason why I ask is I also wonder, and some providers might be able to respond to this better, but I mean, could a provider do that, or providers do that, and we support? Because we often point to each other.
That's, I think, Joan, what I was like kind of getting at is like, if it's not COC board, which is a fine answer, like who is it? And like, who are you? Is this something that is a priority to you all that you want to try to have somebody else host it if it's not you all? Because this did come out of your mural boards as like, we need to have these folks more involved because they are an active, like they're being actively like impacted by homelessness. And so who is the homelessness agency or like group of agencies that is responsible to them? And maybe there isn't an answer to that.
well, the other thing is, all politics are local. So in that philosophy, it's like, is a jurisdiction that this happens to impact or you happen to be in ready for that? That kind of thing. So it'd really have to be, I'm thinking this is not necessarily something we need to facilitate at this time, but I think that we should be open to participating and playing some kind of role. It could be a different role every time. If a jurisdiction or an advocacy group or a group of providers want to do something like this, I certainly think we should listen. Not necessarily thinking we want to facilitate something like that at this moment.
Agreed, Brian. Like I can see ASU wanting to do something. I could see
Yeah.
I could see the Housing Coalition. We all need to kind of be lockstep a little bit more.
Yeah. I could definitely see like an ASU. That's like my first thought.
I think that was like a really healthy discussion. Do we have any other kind of thoughts or feedback on this one before we move on? Cool, sweet. Moving on to advocacy process and strategy. So I know this has been a conversation that has kind of like passing the buck from person to person and trying to figure out like, where does the COC fit into that? And so I wanted to have like a really kind of conversation about what does your charter say and how do you want to act on it? In the past, one of the issues, the COC is not really, it is an individual body, but there isn't somebody that is necessarily like the COC. So if you point to the COC, like who are you actually pointing at? So if we said you all can act and vote on things as the COC, who is the person signing in at the very like least level at the legislator saying, I am on behalf of the COC. And so that has been kind of like the hesitation in the past, and why in the past we have directed advocacy efforts to the Housing Coalition, because they are a body that can sign in, and Joan can sign in on behalf of the Housing Coalition and say, like, this is our voice. So in the past, we've always like kind of referred to that and then continue to have you be legislatively informed, and then also encourage you to sign in individually or on behalf of your organization if that's something your organization allows. Wanted to create space to have that conversation with you all of if you think that should be different, what that would look like, and then also kind of like where do you kind of like feel that, how do you feel about it?
So having been a part of these discussions and being frustrated by it over the years, it's like my first reaction is like, hey, the COC should have an opinion, but I actually have kind of flipped my thinking on that, because honestly, it's COC members that should have an opinion. And every agency or different content area is really coming from a different perspective, and everybody should be weighing in. because we are a group of different perspectives, right? And we pride ourselves on having the diversity we need. That doesn't necessarily mean we're always going to reach consensus. So I personally have actually think it's more powerful to, when we need advocacy, let the coalition lead the way. That's their role. And then, but we all have to commit to being there as in whatever role we play, a provider, a jurisdiction, a advocacy organization. I guess I've kind of flipped my script on that. I really think agencies have to be representing themselves.
It's funny you say that, Ryan. Ditto, exactly. Same here. I flipped my thinking on this.
Right? Too. We've had a lot of practice this session, Lisa.
What's that?
We've had a lot of practice this session.
It makes exactly.
Also, add, I think this is now a session where housing is becoming more and more of a hot topic, and there's a lot of things that are introduced that may have differing opinions versus in the past. Of course, the COC is going to want more funding for the Housing Trust Fund, and so it hasn't been all of you should weigh in and say yes, we want more money. And so that is, I think this is the first year where we've seen some division or some counter opinions.
I would add that it also benefits, having each individual organization. And again, while there's no requirement to follow the coalition's lead, but it also shows either strength in numbers when it's, if you did, right, follow the Housing Coalition's lead, it's helpful to have Arizona Housing Coalition, CAS, UMOB, City of it's beneficial. So it allows for both flexibility and autonomy as well. So
I do think it's important though for MAG to let members know what issues are happening, as Joan does. And what roles they can play, and make sure there's an education component, an awareness component. I do think that is our responsibility, because how do you talk about housing without talking about policy? I think there's a responsibility to keep that up, but then encourage every agency or individual to, make their feelings known, or their
Joan, I want to pause and not put you on the spot, but I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Would it be helpful? I know Joan has been giving a great update at the board each month. Would it be helpful to include that in the newsletter? But then also when there's items at the legislator to say go in, which maybe even it's getting heard tomorrow, but the coalition sends out an advocacy alert. Is it helpful to have that also sent out by MAG?
When we do advocacy alerts on a broad level to kind of galvanize and mobilize our membership, it would be great if MAG also either included it in the newsletter or sent it, forwarded it out to whatever distribution that makes sense. Yes, that would be lovely.
I don't know they're going to let you do that, Katie.
Right. I don't think so either, but they will through the newsletter, maybe, right? No, maybe.
I can follow
because it's an association of governments. I don't know.
So it would just be sending out to the COC board committee. So it's anybody who has signed up for those committees to learn about what is happening. And we're not saying take a stance. We're just saying this is happening. So I believe we are okay on that, but I will double check because we have had those conversations.
My action alert, when the Housing Coalition's action alerts are often vote yes, vote no, encourage your members or encouraging your elected officials to vote yes or vote no.
So we may need to change the language saying, this is what's going on. This is this bill, go take action on it, instead of telling you which way to go.
Yeah. The one thing I struggle with, I'm just going to be candid, is that sometimes our advocacy is not grassroots focused, in the sense that sometimes it's more diplomatic advocacy where we have to not galvanize everybody, not mobilize everybody, because we want to kind of just be quiet and subtlety. That's not, I'm not good at it, but that's what we're trying to aim at times. So we haven't been doing a lot of advocacy alerts. but it's really what I can do, and this, Katie, you and I have talked about this, is that we have the Housing Coalition has an every other Friday policy committee meeting during the legislative session. We do take meeting minutes. I can try and have those meeting minutes a little bit more streamlined so that you can use that as a opportunity to share that information. And again, that's just information sharing. So
I would like to suggest, just based on this conversation, how we were kind of tiptoeing around exactly what it is and isn't, is maybe pull together and have it reviewed to make sure that we don't overstep in certain things, because that's not the intent. I think the intent is to inform. And so just because we're all being careful, it might be good to have somebody look at it. And I don't know who that person is, but it's for good intentions.
Rob, if similarly, I'm just going to say one other thing that my membership staff member would probably be kicking me to not say, and that is, I can't give away the milk for free. You have to pay for the cow, right? Like, or whatever that saying is. I'm happy to share some information, but some of it is a pay to play, right? Like we're a membership organization. We want you to join our organization to get the intel. So I just want you to know that I'm trying to, but MAG is a member and you guys pay membership dues. So it's a little bit of a delicacy that I'm going to be navigating.
Wonder, what if we always in the newsletter just put the link to the update on the coalition's page. And then in order to click on it, they have to be a member, right?
Oh, you think we're that sophisticated?
Something like that.
How about that be a goal that we work towards?
Okay.
But I do think, like, Joan, I think there is like some level of like, we can, like, you are providing all of that information. So tagging it to Arizona Housing Coalition with your website is totally justified in that newsletter piece.
And I mean, what we're saying to the membership then is, hey, this stuff's going on. And if you want to know more about it, go here. Instead of having to recreate. Oh, and by the way, sign up.
So I think, to give you all context too, I bring that conversation up. We also, like in the past, how this was included in your charter was language on MAG's responsibilities would be to forward advocacy issues to the Housing Coalition. In your last revision of the charter, that was like kind of null and void because Joan is on the board and constantly updating you all on kind of advocacy that is happening. And so our recommendation would be to add back to the roles and responsibilities of every committee, subcommittee, and the board would be that advocacy language around specifically saying that like the committee or the COC is not weighing in, but you as an individual can weigh in as well as you on behalf of your agency if you have the ability to. And we would recommend, and also like having policy, I worded this much better in an email to our team, but also that you all will be getting like updates from the coalition. And like Joan even provided an update to the committee when they requested it last month. So I do believe that like kind of across the committees, people are getting legislative updates. Okay, so my last ask to you, I know it's Thursday at 4:40, so we're gonna like let you out hopefully at least 10 minutes early, but would be this communications work group is like you have a lot of ideas, but kind of taking that to the next step and really drafting a communications plan and starting to talk about like, what does this look like? The small but mighty communications work group said like, we really need more folks and we really like, this needs to be an ad hoc work group. Are there folks from your group that you all either want to volunteer or volunteer yourself and also we would be putting this out to the committee and all the other subcommittees to join if they're interested. I'm assuming we could meet on like a once a month-ish basis until this is drafted and kind of work from there, unless you all want to meet more frequently or less frequently. And that work group would be responsible for starting to like really start to assemble some of these activities, assignments, things that are happening.
Are you talking about communications or everything?
Communications.
Okay. We already have a communications team, right? But they were to bring like, no.
Who did you think was on the communications team?
I thought it was Chris.
No.
I don't remember. Eric volunteered.
So we had a small but mighty communications work group that was 3 board members that turned into 2. And that is not enough for a work group.
Okay, so you need more is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Or like if you all like, I also like, without putting them on blast, I don't know if the 2 of them were even interested in participating. They said they would like kind of take the first stab at this. I can reach out
and they did good.
Them and see if there's like some follow-up if they're interested in participating.
Katie, what's the time commitment again?
I would say an ad hoc basis. I would assume like maybe once a month for a couple of months until we figure out kind of like a overall structure, and then kind of maybe it dissolves or maybe it becomes a committee, and at that point you could bow out. I say that with like a question mark at the end.
Yeah, I'd be interested to round out my Arizona orientation.
Awesome. I will also say that there are people from the committee interested in joining. So we can put this out to other committee and subcommittee if you all think that's a good idea.
I do.
I see some bobbing of heads and thumbs up, so I'm going to move forward and advertise to them as well. And I will say, if you are interested in attending, maybe I'll set a date for after the coalition conference in late April, and then we can kind of start from, or I guess like mid to late April, 3rd week is what we're aiming for, around the 20th. Don't even know if that's not a weekend. And then kind of go from there, and we can see who's interested. Awesome. Feel free to just decline my invite if you're not interested too. Okay, the last thing that I do want to touch on, I guess 2 more things, 2 more announcements. One, the NOFO scorecard was reviewed, and some of you all or people from your team were on that. One of the big changes for this year is specifically on racial equity. The questions around race equity, last year there were 2 questions. They were both narrative questions, and the goal this year would be to have 2 narrative questions and 2 data questions. However, there was like a lot of kind of like mixed emotions and feelings around those questions and how that narrative is written. We're holding space both tomorrow at noon and Monday at 11 to really kind of try to like figure out what those questions are, how those questions are worded, and what data we are collecting. If you're interested in attending either of those or have specific feedback, please send me an email and we will get you added to those invites, or just have feedback on the process or like data to include. Please let me know. And then the last thing I will say is please review your agenda for Monday. One of the conversations that will be on the agenda for Monday is your system performance measures. So that'll be a play-by-play of 2021 system performance measures that Solari will be walking you through. But another hot topic on that agenda item is homelessness data and how we are continuing to use data to tell the narrative of homelessness. And we really want it to be a robust discussion, moving either potentially like away from the point in time count being our primary data point and towards the system flow synthesis or other data points that you're interested in. And this is something like I feel like we will give you a presentation on it, but like I also want you all to like have feelings and thoughts on it. We don't want to silence them. Any like questions, thoughts? Awesome. Well, letting you go 15 minutes early. Cannot say I kept you over this time, but happy to stay on if anybody has any other feedback or things to talk about.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Happy early Friday.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.